Done that. It's up to Spurs now.
Hello, you're welcome along to the Sunday Papers. It's Joe Molloy here, and you are watching live on Facebook. You may also be listening on podcast. We have in studio Niall Kelly, Deputy Editor of The 42, and we have Andy Mcgeady as well, journalist and broadcaster. Gents, you're both very welcome. Thanks for popping in. It's much appreciated. So I'll give people a flavour of the back pages. Firstly, it's all really about Jose Mourinho, the weekend that's in it. So more trouble after dressing down his United stars before the Southampton game. Jose is booed by own fans for hauling Rashford off. This is after their 2-2 draw yesterday. And it seems to be a theme right across the papers. So, dog on. Jose moans, we have no mad dogs to fight our corner. This was his big complaint yesterday. Southampton 2, Manchester United 2. We have the back page of the Star. Mad dog Marcus. Rashford leads bite back. It seems the only player he thought was a mad dog was Marcus Rashford. I would say Marcus was a mad dog until he was, let's say, very, very tired, was Jose's point. And then we have the back page of the Sun. Again, Jose, we need mad dogs. And then drama on Derby Day, surrender. Sol Campbell thinks that Arsenal and Spurs have already surrendered the league. And then Klopp, you're too scared to stop City. So he's almost making the point that other teams in the league are afraid of City and maybe not giving them a decent rattle beating when they're in the tunnel and all those cliches. So point of no return then, Southampton 2, Manchester United 2. Draw no comfort as Reds fall 16 points behind Manchester City now. The Sunday Mirror go with the picture of Ander Herrera there and its hairdryer. United lacked mad dogs as Jose blasts his lucky stars for making bad decisions in dire draw. And then finally, the Sunday Independent. There's a story at the bottom of the Sunday Independent. Clubs have been surveyed, really, and their big concern, as you might imagine, is finance. That's GAA clubs. And then at the top, big picture of David De Gea diving in the air. And it's Jose bemoans lack of mad dogs as United fall flat again. And then the Sunday Times, which I did have open earlier on, talk to Gary Breen, has an interesting story on the bottom page I just wanted to show you very quickly. So again, it's the Jose Mourinho situation at the top. Where are my mad dogs? And at the bottom, De Gea in standoff on new United deal. So David De Gea, you might have seen during the week, there might have been relief on the face of it that Manchester United had triggered the extra year extension in his clause. But it seems Duncan Castle's with the story here that De Gea's representatives want him to either be allowed move this summer, or if Manchester United trigger the clause and think they're going to sell him maybe at some stage next season, he's not going to agree to go. He's going to run down his contract and he will leave for free in the summer of 2020. So if they don't up his pay to level with Alexis Sanchez, which is 400 grand a week, he is going to accept the extension, stay for a year, and then from January 2020 he'll be free to talk to other clubs, and he's going to wind down that contract no matter how quickly they try and sell him. So they're either going to have to give him 400 grand a week and get him to sign a longer contract, or he's going to wind it down all the way and leave as a free agent, it seems, if they trigger the extension, or he may go this summer if they want to sell him. So he either wants out, he wants more money, or if they're going to punish him, he's going to punish them. That seems to be the gist of it. So it's just another mess for Jose Mourinho to try and sort out. So we won't labour the Manchester United point because I think that's been talked about a lot at this stage. We've got various bits and pieces to get through. We might start, Niall, given that you're here, given that you're the toast of the town, the man of the hour. You have done it again, really. After the brilliant Philly McMahon book last year, you've collaborated with Andy Lee again this year, and the results have been equally good according to everyone. I haven't read it yet. It's on the to-do list, very much on the to-do list, but I've heard great things from people who are really good judges. Paul Kimmage is one of the official judges on the panel, and he's been writing about the entries, and his three, really, the fighter, Tony 10, the lost soul of Eamon McGee were certainly the big ones that jumped out for him. We'll get on to his piece in just a second. How did it go with Andy? Well, clearly is the result. Was the process equally smooth?
Yes, it really was. I guess I've said a few times, talking to different people, that when I finished up working with Philly last year, never really envisaged getting my teeth stuck into another project so quickly again. But when the opportunity to work with someone like Andy came along, and specifically with Andy came along, it's an opportunity that nobody could turn down. A huge admirer of his from before we ever started working together. Hadn't actually had a huge amount of professional dealings with him before. Only ever covered one of his fights, which was his comeback, his first fight under Adam Booth when he fought Anthony Fitzgerald on Carl Frampton's undercard up in Belfast. So I'd met him a handful of times before we started working together, but a huge admirer of him, a huge admirer of how he approaches sport, and from what I had heard, like in all of his interviews, the real cerebral, intellectual nature of kind of how he thinks about sport and life and talks about sport and life, and that was the real attraction for me. That if they were the parameters that we were embarking on this project together under, that it was always going to be fascinating. Like, I knew he really wanted to do it. He was ambitious for the book. He was ambitious for the project, and it made it a very, very easy sell for me when it came to getting stuck into it. And then brought a lot of energy to it as well. Right. In terms of when you're working with someone who wants to do that and wants to be really creative and really wants to attack the project and make something that, as Andy has said, he hopes will stand the test of time, it does make it very, very easy to, even if you're coming off the back of a project on a very short turnaround, to get stuck in again and really go for it.
So in practical terms, what does that mean?
His energy and his enthusiasm, it kind of means a lot of time working together, kind of covering as many bases. It means that when you ask a question, even if the first time there's a little bit of reticence until you've kind of developed that working relationship, they might be a little bit held back, that once you're up and running and once the two of you have kind of cemented that working relationship, I knew there was nothing I couldn't ask. Yeah. There was nothing that I would kind of get the cold shoulder of an answer, or nothing that he wouldn't consider us addressing as part of the project. And it meant as well that just, that there was nothing that was too ambitious or nothing that was too or anything along those lines that Andy would have ruled out, and like a lot of kind of great ideas for what he wanted it to be. And it was it was a collaboration in the best sense of it, as I can imagine it.
And what form does that take? Where do you meet?
Where did we meet? Well,
where do you meet across the process? Do you go to his house? Do you meet at a coffee shop?
We spent a lot of time actually working in an office close by. So my office is just around the corner from here, and Andy lives not a million miles away. Yeah. So there was an office space we had access to very kindly, that we were able to work through. And like, you kind of sit down a couple of times a week for a couple of hours at a time. And the natural ending point usually was one or either of us just being completely exhausted by how much we had got through. And like, it was brilliant in the sense that I would ask Andy occasionally a question, and he would go off on this most wonderful tangent for maybe 10 minutes and go down a rabbit hole of just detail and insight that only he could really bring. And then would look at me and say, "Was that any good?" And I'd say, "Yes, this is the gold that we need. This is exactly the kind of stuff." And every time we sat down, there was something that I never could have expected. Yeah. It turned out I would never have expected the conversation to take. And some of them were very small, maybe relatively mundane details, and some of them were just aspects of the story that I never considered that we would dive into.
And how many times do you think you met and sat?
I'd tell you, if you kept count of the hours now, you probably, like, it's very hard to. It is like it's very hard to kind of put a tally on it. Like, but we were working together fairly intensively until we knew we had enough material, and then it was a case of putting that material together into some form of structure and draft, which we kind of worked out as we were going along. Like, we didn't sit down with our framework. We kind of sat down with the framework of Andy's life, but knew that necessarily might not be the framework that we would use to tell the story. Figured that out kind of as we were going along, and then once we kind of had the first kind of the bones of the structure there, then there was a lot of work in kind of, well, how does this sit and how do we want to frame it, and where are the gaps, where are the holes? Like, if somebody is sitting down to read this, what are they going to want more of, what are they going to want less of? And it takes an awful lot of back and forth, but when you have somebody that wants to have those conversations, wants to really engage in it on all of those levels, it's brilliant.
Slightly tough question maybe, but so you've done two now, and you do it once very well, and that's very noticeable. You do it twice, and then everybody says, okay, that's no fluke, for sure. So you've done it twice now. If you were to give yourself some advice, or someone some advice beyond, make sure you're collaborating with
the right
somebody
people
who's very giving, which I think is probably a huge part of it. Ultimately, you can only work with the tools you're given. What advice would you give yourself or someone who was embarking on one of these collaborations?
That is a very, very difficult question. Like, I have no doubt I have been incredibly fortunate with the two people that I have had the opportunity to work with, and incredibly fortunate with the stories that they wanted to tell, and the fact that both of them came and both of them came with the best of intentions. Both of them wanted to do both of their very different, very individual stories for the best
I didn't get
reasons.
the sense either of these were doing it for the money.
No, absolutely not. Like, both came with a real purpose to the project. I mean, can you advise someone to only work on projects like that? Probably not.
To a point, you've got to walk away from certain ones if you want it to be good.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing I learned through both was to keep the collaboration at the heart of it. To remember that, you know, that these people are putting their lives on show, and to be the best kind of facilitator you can be in drawing their best selves out of themselves and getting it on the page. And I think hopefully that is what people who read either of those books will come to find, would be my hope.
So, Andy, Paul Kimmage had a plethora of books arrive, like all the judging panel did, and decided how to try and navigate his way through them.
Yeah, the postman arrived with a large box of books. And
Christmas comes early.
Yeah, and it's, when you read the various books of the year, it's one of the little simple thoughts I have. I wonder how Judge X, Y and Z actually went through the process. And this is the nice thing about, for me, this piece, is that Paul brings us through the process. He said, look, I culled 7 immediately. One was a picture book, one was a coffee table book, and these are obviously things which this judge here, they're not to his flavour, and that's fine. That's why you have a panel. And then he eventually gets down to his select group of sort of 8 to 10 that he's going to go, I'm going to choose one I've read, beat that. And it's really interesting, and it's it's coming up to the time of year where people want to get a flavour for it, and I think it does the job very well. Yeah,
he gives a good sense of a number of the big contenders. So he says the Cora book, Game Changer, first autobiography of a female GAA star, solid, well written, lacks depth or reflection, perhaps because the subject is a complex woman determined to keep us at arm's length. I guess that is in contrast to Andy, based on what you're saying, who is happy to give you a big bear hug.
Yeah, very, very different scenario. I mean, as Paul alludes to, like, Andy is retired now and can feel free to kind of speak at length on all of these things.
Yes, and Paul says perhaps because she's still playing. And also, I do think it is easier for individual sports people. They have no duty to their teammates.
But that's very true.
A lot of sports people feel very queasy about giving the secrets of the dressing room. They don't feel they're necessarily just theirs to give. And that's a situation Andy doesn't have to deal with. He says next up was The Fighter, and he says the prettiest of the pile. It is a fantastic cover, isn't it?
Yeah, as I said a long time out when we settled on the cover, I'd be very happy for people to judge this book by its cover. Like, I would have no qualms at all about that.
The prettiest of the pile, with its stupendously glorious cover and a narrative that surprises and enchants from the opening page. The surprise is that it's not so much a memoir as a beautifully crafted essay on what it is to fight. The enchantment is the honesty as the fighter finds love and reflects on the things that matter in life. A seamless collaboration. Look at you blush here, Kelly. A seamless collaboration between Lee and his ghostwriter, Niall Kelly, who had steered Philly McMahon to last year's top prize. The Fighter set a standard I was convinced would not be matched. Next, he has Davy Fitzgerald and Sean Mannion, aka the man who was never knocked down. Couldn't scratch it, was his thoughts on that. He mentions Paul Rouse's The Hurlers, justified the glowing reviews and went up to number 2 on his list suddenly. And then there was Driven and Dublin, The Chaos Years and The Obsession were behind that. But he says the deal was done, the fighter would not be caught. He says then something ridiculous happened. Tony 10 had been collecting dust since it had been sent last March, and he gave it a chance because he works with Declan Lynch as much as anything he half says, and then he picked it up one Sunday morning and couldn't put it down. Suddenly, The Fighter or Tony 10, I couldn't choose. And then The Lost Soul of Eamon Mcgeady was one of the last on my list. I'd never heard of the author, I didn't care much for the subject, and I'd approached it with the same reserve I'd had for Tony 10, and it got the same result. It absolutely blew my doors off. And our shortlist is The Fighter, The Lost Soul of Eamon Mcgeady, and Tony 10. The winner will be announced in Dublin on Thursday. It's interesting, he talks to a friend who has The Fighter ahead of The Lost Soul of Eamon Mcgeady, and Paul is leaning towards The Lost Soul of Eamon Mcgeady. But you suspect that those three, The Fighter, The Lost Soul of Eamon Mcgeady and Tony 10, in fact not suspect because he tweeted as much, but he said it's just a fantastic shortlist, the best in years actually in Irish writing.
Well,
you can't comment.
No, only for to say that the comment that people that would always make in this kind of situation, that it's an absolute privilege to even be considered along nominees of that caliber, absolutely holds true here. Like, I mean, it is like the long list I thought this year myself was very strong. There was probably a half dozen to 8 books that I thought were really, really excellent this year, really excellent contenders. So just to even be still standing as one of the final 3 and in contention is...
You even speak with
delighted.
boxing cliches now.
I've been spending too much time with Andy, far too much time with Andy.
It's great to be still standing. I just hope we can deliver a knockout blow on Thursday. Says knockout. Andy, you're a voracious reader, I suspect.
When I put my mind to it,
As much as a man can be with children and in life, but...
Well, it is funny. Did you happen to read, I'm slightly on a tangent here, did you happen to read the piece that was published in Australia this week about sportsbook reading and the circulation? The stunningly low sales figures of sports books in Australia, but they were also looking at just general reading and the changing of reading habits, and the fact that we as a generation are spending lots of time consuming stuff, but not just sitting down with a book. You know, it's part of the thing. Like I love doing it, but there are demands in our time, and you do need to plan it a little bit more. You're absolutely right. There's one thing that jumped out to me in that piece before we move on is the Tony 10 bit. It had been collecting dust. Why? Because it was, quote, the worst cover I'd ever seen, says Paul. And contrast that with the fabulous cover in the Andy Lee book. It is really important. Like, it sounds like a small thing, but so many books, when you go into a bookshelf, they all look the same. Yeah. A lot of them do look the same, and it takes something a little bit special for that to pop out if you haven't been paying attention to the various long lists and short lists and whatever, or if he's not your favourite sports person or whatever, take something a little bit special. And we might actually get to the question about even just newspaper layout later on in the conversation.
Yeah, without getting into the vagaries of the publishing world, like I have to say, and Andy would say if he was sitting here, or Andy Lee would say if he was sitting here, that we are incredibly fortunate to have worked with a great publisher in Gael with great vision for this project. And they, like the cover there, like it's very unusual. I think a few people have said to us, very unusual for not to just have the standard kind of head and shoulders shot as the cover of your sports autobiography, and that was always something that we wanted to steer clear of. We wanted to do something, because we wanted to do something that we felt captured the essence of both the life that Andy has lived and the sport that he has grown up in and given so much to and got so much from. Yeah. And no matter how intentful or purposeful your stare down the lens of a camera is, there's something that it just can't capture in the way that Andy walking away from in the aftermath of a fight does.
I also think it's become so commonplace that it's delved into cliched and boring and a bit thoughtless. You know, it's just so standard now that to do that almost displays a lack of originality that makes you worry slightly about the book. Slap the cover on, the vanity lighting, the nice lighting in the eyes, all that stuff. Boom, Bob's your uncle, front cover, done. It speaks of, I suppose, the thoughtfulness and the integrity in some ways of Andy Lee, and that I heard him talking about the cover. And what you'll notice about the opponent in the corner on the ground is that he's slightly blurred, and Andy was saying they've changed the colour of his shorts to make him as unidentifiable as possible. Now, boxing aficionados will probably recognise the pose and the fight and be able to place it, but the majority of us won't. And Andy's point was, it could just as easily have been me down there, and this is not about humiliating him in any way whatsoever. And again, it speaks of the cerebral overthinking nature of Andy Lee and the decency of him, but it's great.
That was something that was fundamental to him, that if that was going to be the cover that was used, that there were very specific terms on which it could be used, and it was all along the lines of what you've just gone through there. I mean, like, he was insistent that was the way it had to be.
It's very respectful. That's the best way, isn't it?
100%. But that is, anybody who knows Andy, anybody who's spent any amount of time with him will like, that's just Andy to a T.
Yeah. Will you read Tony 10 and The Lost Soul of Eamon Mcgeady? Will you get around to that?
I will. I have both of them at home. I actually haven't had a chance to I started reading Eamon Mcgeady just the other night. I've had it at home for a while, and started reading it after the William Hill Prize was announced.
This week,
Yeah, this week. Obviously a huge achievement for an Irish publisher. As far as I could see, because I don't think Rough Ride was published originally under an Irish publication. So as far as I could tell, maybe the first Irish publisher ever to win the William Hill, which obviously is a massive, massive achievement. And huge kudos to Mercer. But yeah, I would intend the pile is growing, unfortunately, faster than it's being got through. So, but yeah.
He's in an email correspondence with a friend about the Eamon Mcgee book, and the friend says, I can think of a better name for this book, Eamon Mcgee, Diary of a Scumbag. Not a likeable subject matter is the point that Paul makes as well. A brilliant book, but not a likeable subject matter. Have you found it difficult to warm to the book because of that so far, or are you not far enough in?
I'm probably not far enough in, but I have to say I did find when the book came out originally and Eamon did his publicity tour, he did a few fascinating set-piece interviews, one of which was with Donald McRae, who was the authority on boxing and boxing writing at the moment.
He's got a book coming out himself soon.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, the piece itself was illuminating, and I think for anybody who maybe isn't sure whether or not they will warm to Eamon Mcgeady as a person or as a personality, to read that, find out just how many layers there are to him. I mean, it is touched on. Paul's colleague that he talks to says that, you know, it goes against the first principle of any book or film, which is that you should be able to find some sympathy with the main protagonist. And Paul challenges that view and says, well, is that necessarily always the case? But I think it's a book that I'm expecting, knowing what I know, it's a book that I'm expecting to be all the better for the complexity of the character, and it doesn't seem to be varnished or whitewashed in any way. And, you know, I don't think Eamon Mcgeady is lying in bed at night wondering, are people going to like me because of what I've said in this book? I think he's just said, this is my story, let it be told and let people see what they think.
Is this going to become your thing now? Every year, every 2 years, are you going to look to collaborate with someone? Have you enjoyed the process enough to want to do it again? Some authors come away saying, I ain't going through that again anytime soon. Yeah,
as I kind of mentioned a few minutes ago, like, I have been incredibly fortunate with the two personalities and the two projects I've had an opportunity to work on. It couldn't give you anything but energy and enthusiasm to do another one again. Or whether that's next year, I don't know. There's a few people in my life that I need to discuss that with before embarking on again. But you know, I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and you know, I think that hopefully the two works will stand on their merits, and you know that people will enjoy reading them. And if that's the case, then that's all you can really ask for.
Yeah, well, the early signs are good. So best of luck on Thursday.
Thank you very much.
I was asking you beforehand, will you get suddenly a phone call on Wednesday saying, you're definitely going to be there, aren't you? Thinly veiled.
Yeah, I don't think so, but the Board Gosh, or the An Post Awards as they are now, were on Tuesday night, and which corresponded to one, which was a great night. So I have every intention of being at the Air Awards now, win, lose or draw. Okay, very good. You can practice your disappointed but happy for the opponent. I'm working on it. Yeah. Do not switch off your radio. We will not spend too long in this because the GAA rules have been talked about a lot all week. I appreciate. There's just two pieces we wanted to mention. The first one, Andy. Joe Brolly takes a different tack here actually with them, which was quite clever.
It's good. There's I mean, again, yes, it's funny because we were talking earlier on, and now you were like, listen, nah, GAA rules, we're not going on to this again. But there are two pieces that are worth your time. None of us drove in this morning hoping to talk about the GAA rules again. No, but Dennis Walsh had me in the Sunday Times when he started talking about statistics. Yeah. And so I'm a sucker for that. It's fine. That's where I'm coming from. But it's a really good piece looking at telling the story about, here's how many hand passes we used to have in the game. Here's how many hand passes we do. But he also goes a little bit deeper, looking at the passages of possession, the chains of pass passes. It's really good. Yeah. And again, looking at this from a very statistical point of view, working in David Hassan, the chairman of the GAA Standing Committee on Playing Rules, his perspective, and also looking at the work done by Rob Carroll, who anyone on the video analysis or sports stats work in any sport in this side of the world would have come across Rob. He's been working in this area for years, and he has done a lot of the founding work in not just the analysis of the stats, but even collecting it. Yeah. So he knows this route to branch. So they've included a lot of this in there. So it's a very statsy piece. It's pretty good. Dennis is using the stats, I think, to make one of the rarer arguments this week, which is that actually this is well worth trying and giving some time. So he says the decline of the kicked pass, this is the byline, decline of the kicked pass has been football's global warming, and it must be tackled to save the sport as a spectacle. And, you know, it's funny, he's going back to like 1992, the All-Ireland football final when Donegal beat Dublin, and he's saying it was noted that day that Matt Gallagher, the fullback, didn't kick the ball for the entire game. For a long time afterwards, this was quoted as a curiosity rather than something meaningful. Several years later, 97, Mayo against Kerry, it showed that there had been more hand passes than kicked passes. For the reformers, this was another flashing light. And then he goes to 98, and a quote from Pat Daly, who was the GAA's games development manager at the time. And in 98, he said, the hand pass has really taken over from the kick pass. If we allow that slide to continue,
then we'd be failing our duty to lovers of all the sport. From a distance of 20 years, then, says Dennis, the words were quite prophetic. So Dennis's argument is there was an opportunity in the 90s to address the growing imbalance between the hand pass and the foot pass in Gaelic, and that wasn't taken. And where we are now, the All-Ireland final last year, 75% of all passes were made with the hand or fist, is where we are now. And I thought this was very interesting. This is the Rob Carroll point, and this explains, I think if you're watching Gaelic football now, this is a good thing to be aware of. This is almost the underlying philosophy or understanding of the game that I would say a lot of inter-county teams operate with. So in 2011, teams were averaging 64 or 65 passages of possession a game. That's now fallen to 44. So we've gone from 65 passages of possession a game down to 44, which is a big drop in the space of just 7 years. So the quote is, on average, says Hassan, you need 18 or 19 points to win an inter-county game. So to reach the 18 or 19 points, you're going to need 36 or 37 shots at goal. So very quickly, he says, you can see how the figures start to back up. If you only have 44 possessions in a game, you need 36 or 37 of those to result in at least an attempt on goal. So the obvious point is you have to keep the ball for as long as possible to get into a position where you shoot. So you need 19 points to win a game is how the GA teams understand it. If you need 19 points, you're probably going to need 36 or 37 shots. If you only have 44 to 45 possessions these days, then you're basically going to have to, every time you get a possession, the team are now thinking we have to get a shot off here at all costs. And that is why they're so risk averse with the passing. That is the philosophy. Could be totally wrong. There's an argument if you work the ball in more and take a few more chances, you'll get more shots. But that's what they're all working off. And it was quite interesting. But Dennis's point, and I thought this was the jump out statistics, he said, as recently as 2011, 83% of hand passes came in chains of 3 or less. And that figure is now still at 70%, 69, so 70% basically at 3 or less. So he's making the point, that's not going to be that radical a shift. It's not an insurmountable gap, he says, to reverse. If 70% of the time they're still making 3 or less hand passes, that may not completely transform the game as much as we might know it. Then Joe Brolly's piece becomes pretty interesting.
Yeah. Correct, and it's the contrast here where the end of Dennis's piece dovetails very nicely into the Joe Brolly piece. And Dennis's point, just to reiterate, is that, well, you're not really going to see that as much change as you might think based on the stats as they are now. I'm
shocked that 69% is going beyond 3 hand passes in a row, actually. I thought it would be much higher.
But then Joe comes out on his immediate start. Niall, I might let you lead this one out.
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole crux, and the title of the Joe Brolly article is "A World Where Derry Never Won the All-Ireland is a world I want no part of," which is obvious on a number of grounds. But the whole essence of this is Joe looks at some of the great goals and some of the great moments in GAA history that could never have happened under this new rule, and brings to life exactly the consequences of what a 3 hand pass limit would look like. He starts off with the third replay of the Leinster Championship famously in 1991, that Meath v Dublin epic, and touches on how Kevin Foley's goal would never have happened if it was if there was limited 3 hand passes. Goes on to talk.
He does it well. He charts the move and in brackets says that's hand pass 1.
Yeah.
That's hand pass 2. And then, like, as a reader, you can feel the impending doom of, oh no, they're coming to hand pass 4.
And it's the same. He does the same then dealing with that magnificent goal that Cura Finn scored last year against Nemo.
Yeah.
Again, another goal which would never have happened. And what he does then is kind of distills it down to the practicalities of the scenario. I'll just read through this here.
Yeah.
Let's run through another practical scenario. Dublin win possession. Carlow retreat into their 14-man zone, just inside their own 45-metre line. Dublin come forward. Coming through the middle third, they can either foot pass or hand pass, but they don't have the option of kick passing it to a forward inside the scoring zone, so it must be short passing, whether by the hand or foot. Now they reach the defensive cordon. Instead of several hand passes and clever movement designed to open up that zone and create a scoring opportunity that must be quickly taken before the pass descends, they must now kick pass sideways and backwards. After 3 hand passes, they'll be forced to kick it either back or laterally, since even if a teammate has broken in through in a good position, the ball can not only be kicked to him, and that is just not possible. Yeah. Will we be even more bored? Will we be howling in frustration? Say the fourth hand pass would put the forward in on goal? Tough.
Yeah, I know. Like, that is the if you imagine that scenario, that is just the doomsday scenario for this rule.
I kind of feel like that both of them come at this from a slightly different philosophical angle. And Dennis is all about incentivising risk from the forwards, whereas Joe is pointing out the folly of maybe doing that. Nobody's really talking about how do you de-incentivise the defensive side.
Yeah.
Like that, and I'm sure that the Standing Rules Committee and all of the committees that have been set up by the GAA to examine this have looked at all possible approaches.
But Brawley has spoken to someone on the Rules Committee who said to him last week they have diagnosed the symptom, not the illness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at that same line here, and also the next paragraph, he sort of really spells it out, and I've seen this written in a number of places, that this new rule would have the perverse effect of making it even easier for the blanket defending team, because it's another thing that the forwards can't do.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
I
I mean, that you would restrict forwards where space is at a premium close to goal to 3 hand passes just seems crazy. Imagine trying to... We're going to have players surrounded and almost having their foot up around their head as they try and kick because they're being closed down so much when they're somewhere within the 30 metres of goal.
And it seems, it's kind of like, a lot of the talk has been about the NBA and shot clocks, and it seems reasonable to put the onus on the attacking team to do something meaningful with their possession. But there are plenty of instances, I was trying to think through as many as I could outside, whereby the onus is also on the defending team to do something. Like in rugby, like the defensive team have the obligation to stay onside at the breakdown. They have to abide by that, otherwise they're conceding a penalty. Like, is there a scenario that we could look at that's not necessarily going to put all of the onus on the attacking team to be riskier, which we're seeing that there's a clear aversion to?
Yeah.
And maybe do something to mitigate the kind of the defensive swarms. Like, is there a limit to, I don't know,
the number of players?
The number of players inside your 45.
I do wonder about that. Like, on the face of it, that would change things very dramatically. You just wonder, is it too gimmicky or something?
Yeah, well, any more or less than saying 3 hand passes and then that's it?
Well, no, I'd give you that. And actually, I heard Mark O'Shea on The Last Word on Friday. He made a point I hadn't quite thought of, which is that sometimes when there is the inane hand passing going on around the middle third of the field, referees will take the opportunity to glance inside to the full forward line to make sure there's no pulling and dragging going on. And sometimes you will have a free blown up. Whereas now a referee cannot take his eyes off the hand passing. So actually, the Philly McMahons of the world, Niall, your mate Philly, has just been given free rein. But it's I thought it was a good point that hadn't been made, and there's loads of others. It seems in all the trial matches that players have just taken to kick passing backwards quite a bit around the middle tier.
And the point actually that Joe makes in that first scenario where he's gone back to the 1991 Leinster final is not that, like he details the 6 hand passes in the lead up to Foley's goal. The point that he makes is not that Meath were some like hand passing aficionados in the early 90s.
No.
They actually were probably, of all the teams, loved a long kick pass.
That's what he said.
As many as anybody.
Great kicking team, yeah.
But this was just means to an end. This was just part of their armoury, is the phrase that Joe uses. That the moment arose whereby this was going to get them a crucial goal at a vital moment, and they had the nous to use it.
Yeah.
Is that something that you really want to deprive teams of?
I don't. I mean, I think this won't even make the league.
Really?
Yeah, really. Brawley writes, the hand pass rule comes after a sort of lads discussion about the state of the game in the pub. It's the hand passing that's ruining the game, lads. You're dead right. It should be called handball. I just can't see it working. Well, I hope I'm proved wrong.
We see it's like when you look at how sports adapt, you might call it the shape of the game.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of sports look at the shape of the game. What does our game look like now? What did it look like 10 years ago? What rule changes came in that changed that shape? Or were there simply coaching changes? Like, for example, the NFL is going through a monumental shift in America now, where it's going to look much more for the next couple of years, probably, as if it's a blizzard of offensive stats. So going back to your point about picking out the number of possessions in the game, if you're in a basketball-style game where there's a huge number of possessions, it becomes about what positions don't you score off. Okay, and that's probably what we'll kind of see in the NFL. It's not like that in rugby, but there is an element of it. If you have all the possession in the world, it is going to go in waves. And if you can frustrate a better scoring team, you reduce the number of chances they have to score. What I'm getting at is that there's an incentivization in sport that is determined both by the coaching style of the time and the rules in place at the time. And sometimes you get these weird effects, right? I'd love to know how much thought there has been into this. I'd love to get inside the room of that coaching committee and see Was it simply looking at the surface stats by saying, look, looks like hand passes are bad, here's a lot of hand passes, these two are correlated, therefore let's reduce hand passes?
Yeah.
Or if there's something deeper going on, they're looking at incentivization. For example, is there some way you can incentivize a very long kick pass? You know, we've looked at the mark before.
Well, they have brought in the mark, kicks from outside the 45-metre line. The ball has to travel 20 metres. Yeah. Now, that is just...
Well, you're making life more and more difficult for officials. Like, you're going to be in an AFL stage where you minimum need 2 officials, if not more.
How can you tell the difference between 18.7 metres and 20.1 in a high-stakes game where you're also running at
in the last minute of an All-Ireland final?
Because if you're running as a referee, your perspective is changing as well.
Imagine Hawkeye coming down to measure the number of metres.
Yeah.
That is unenforceable.
Yeah.
But then you also have the issue that has been discussed a number of times before, in that, you know, what about the games that are being played all around the country on a Saturday and Sunday? Like, how do you, like, are you creating different stratas of rules across the board for, or like, are you suddenly expecting the club volunteer who comes out on a Sunday morning to referee the under-18s or the minor game, whatever it is, you know, to suddenly be able to discern the difference between a 20-yard pass and not? I
must say, by the way, because it sounds, I mean, you can sit here and pick apart every suggestion because it's much easier to do that. And it's not easy for to come up with the solution here. And you also can't underestimate, as you said, the law of unintended consequences. Like Malachy Clerkin had a piece during the week where he'd spoken to a university coach who had watched one of the trial games. And so one of the rules is you have to kick the ball forward from the sideline ball. Again, this just limits the forward options. You know, like the attacking forces options are limited there. But if he made the point, this was, wouldn't even occur to me, and you'll like this as the rugby aficionado in the room, that he said it won't be long, because you can't underestimate how cynically coaches will try and devise strategies to take advantage of the rules. He was saying to Malachy, it won't be long now before you have GAA teams kicking for touch into the corner a la rugby, and then pinning the opposition in the knowledge they have to kick the ball forward and creating an overload on that side of the pitch. And they'll have a turnover in the opposition half. So we'll have Gaelic players kicking for touch.
Yeah. But he's completely right.
But I'd say that wasn't even dreamt up in the rules committee room when they were thinking this. Not even for a second would that have occurred to them.
Because there's some things that you can it'll look grand on paper. Yeah. Because you've got a formula. Say, right, lads, we've got a problem. Here's the formula. It's up on a whiteboard, or maybe a nice PowerPoint presentation because they've paid someone to do it. Or sorry, not in the GAA, of course.
No.
But when you see this happen on the pitch, that where suddenly things can really just become very obvious that, oh no, we didn't want that to happen. Right? You know, in going to the rugby world, what do? They use a lot of lower grade competition. Sometimes they'll take an entire tournament, for example, let's say in South Africa. Here's a lower grade, one competition, we're going to try this, see what happens, right? And you know what? It's tough cheese if, quote unquote, the wrong team wins that year because of this rule. Yeah. It was the same rule for everyone, and as long as it's applied that way, that's still okay. And the sport can then learn from that. My thing would be, if you do not learn from that, then you have the real problem, right? So try this. I'd be all in favour of try the rule change, but study it. Don't react immediately at the time because it might actually take a little while for this to play out.
I wonder, and with full credit to everybody involved in bringing this up, I wonder, have we found half the answer here? But if you're going to do something to address the risk element or the adventure element on the attacking side, then do you equally need to do something to address the kind of the blanket situation on the far side? And have we seen half of the right answer, or are we currently looking half the right answer in the face here? Because obviously everybody wants to see more attacking, more adventurous, more exciting games. Yeah. But if you just put the onus on one side of the coin, then is that possible?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think your point is right initially. It's defences that need to be tackled. If there's more space to kick into, players will kick into that space, you know. It's their hand passing because they don't have a brilliant option 20, 30 yards in front of them. So we'll have to see as it goes. There's going to be, I'm sure you saw during the week, there's going to be a chance to reassess things before the league and a decision made on whether or not they're going to carry things into the league. So we'll see how it goes in the pre-season competitions. We spent way more time talking about that than any of us had intended. It's funny when you get into it. So there's a few football pieces. Jim Beglin in the Mail. There's a Daniel Taylor piece that you liked on Sol Campbell in The Observer, Andy, which was very good. Daniel Taylor's a lot of people's go-to guy in The Observer of a Sunday.
It's fantastic. Everything about this piece is brilliant. The subject matter, the intro, So Daniel Taylor in The Observer is writing about Sol Campbell.
Yes.
Sol Campbell is a remarkable human.
Macclesfield's new manager.
Yes. And it's even just the way the page is laid out is good, because one of the first things you see is the little piece underneath the photo, which is Sol in his lovely white jacket, which is not the usual thing one might wear at the unveiling, putting on a scarf.
It's very Liverpool FA Cup.
It is. A lot of Spice Boys going on.
Yeah.
At Thursday's press conference, Macclesfield's new manager described himself as previously being one of the greatest footballers in the world, as if it were perfectly normal to refer to himself that way. So well done, sub-editor. Good job. But the piece starts really well. It must be 4 or 5 paragraphs purely about setting the scene, visiting Macclesfield. So I'll start off.
Yeah, now work away.
Moss Rose was once described as the kind of place from where only a misanthropist would want to send a wish you were here postcard, which isn't the kindest description, but where there will be supporters of Macclesfield Town who are very fond of this unpretentious little ground, but understandable all the same when you take into account the strangely lopsided stands, the matchstick floodlights, the confusing lack of symmetry, and the fact the roof at one end is so low down the third floor residents of Mulberry Court, the block of flats next doors, can see onto the pitch. A more generous description, perhaps, is that there is a lot more charm to be found at these kinds of lower league grounds than some of the identikit bowls in out-of-town industrial estates higher up the football ladder, and it goes along that way. It talks about the local Chinese takeaway. It's a cinematic intro, to use, Niall, your word from earlier on, and then we get into the weird world of Sol Campbell.
Sol Campbell. There are a lot of anecdotes that Daniel Taylor draws on here, both from Thursday's unveiling with Sol Campbell and from Sol Campbell's previous career and previous life. That
he has form.
That he does have form, and I guess the picture that is painted is of a man who's quite eccentric, to use a better word, and more than a little bit of a touch narcissistic, I would dare to say as well. And someone who definitely is full of self-belief and is not shy of telling people about how good he is. One of the tiny anecdotes that Daniel Taylor touches on is from Peter Crouch's new book, and that Portsmouth used to have two masseuses when they played together, and Campbell used to demand having one for each leg. So would monopolise the team masseurs until 2 minutes before a game, and when other players complained, Campbell would lift his head off the massage table and would say, "When you've got 70 caps for England, come back and we'll talk then." Which, considering you're part of a team, is probably not the best way to go about making friends, or to a harmonious dressing room, I would suggest. But I mean, the key to Daniel Taylor's piece, the headline of it is Campbell makes it tricky for himself. Undoubtedly true when you read any of this. But the second half of the headline is, but it should not have been this hard. And that's, I think, where this piece comes into its own, because it looks at kind of the availability of job opportunities for BAME managers in the Football League. I think the stat is that there are 8 out of 92 Football League clubs, which, when you consider, the varying, when you consider the representation among the playing population, is completely out of whack and out of kilter. And I think it's possible to look at Sol Campbell as someone who is a little bit eccentric, but still to see the truth in what he has been saying for the last few years and what Daniel Taylor is saying now, which is that the opportunities are still not here, and that it is bizarre that the man has to go to literally the lowest rung of the Football League ladder to find some sort of opportunity.
He makes the point that Campbell is often open to ridicule. Exhibit A, he refers to himself as one of the greatest minds in football.
Yeah, and
the greatest minds in football.
Yeah. This is where I leap over into the Telegraph to Sam Wallace's piece, which is he's talking about Sol Campbell, but also about, appropriate enough given today's North London derby, Thierry Henry and Patrick Vieira. They're facing each other in the Monaco Nice. Am I right? Monaco and...
Yes, Monaco Nice.
Thank you. Derby. And he's talking about, essentially, his line here, I'll just read out. Essentially, football management is like parenting. Placing oneself second in order that another can flourish, accepting that there is a more important person in the room. And for the game's most successful players, that can be difficult to do. So Wallace is stating that Vieira's done this. He's gone through the youth academy side before going anywhere near top-level management. Then Henry's sort of on that cusp where at times he's still, I am Thierry Henry, but Campbell is still, I am Sol Campbell, you know, and you're going to have difficulty selling that both to players if that persona is what comes across in the day-to-day. People have a personal brand, some people are mad, who knows? The truth might lie some in between. Would you hire that person for your club if that's what really was going to happen in the dressing room?
Yeah, I wondered to an extent over the last, like reading Sol Campbell's interviews over the last little while, how much of it was, in essence, performative. Like how much of it is kind of, you know, putting yourself out there and being a little bit outrageous in order to get the opportunities that you feel that, and the attention that you feel that you're not getting otherwise. Obviously, Daniel Taylor's piece kind of gives light to that. I mean, this is what Sol Campbell is like. I mean, he's not doing this for attention. He's not doing this because the doors are being closed in his face everywhere that he's going. He's doing this because this is...
But it also plays badly, sorry to cut across you though, because go back to Jose Mourinho, I'm the special one. That played badly with the audience here, whereas maybe in some other sports in some other parts of the world it might not play as badly.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I mean, I interviewed Campbell once a couple of years ago, I was saying to you guys earlier on, and with the greatest respect to him, I did find him unusual, just a little bit odd, certainly an extremely high opinion of himself. And it's good to have confidence, but I mean, he was very open about this and to a point where it just became, it was just a strange, it was an odd conversation. I remember at the time on air saying before we played it, this isn't a great interview. We'll play it for you anyway. Just a few kind of moments that were strange. Like, you know, you're saying maybe he's trying to get a bit of attention for himself. Taylor talks about a lack of self-awareness, which I must confess probably was my sense at the time. Lack of self-awareness, he says, doesn't tend to go down too well in dressing rooms of League Two. And it's certainly an issue, if my impression of Campbell is correct, he says, that he doesn't necessarily realise how he comes across sometimes, that he's not the easiest man to read or embrace, and that he might not have the skill set, judging from some of the stuff he comes out with, to leave any real sense that he's a natural team builder. And I would fear for him a little bit, I must say, based on everything we seem to hear about him. But like, good luck to him and everything. But that's why Taylor's point is so good. He's highlighting there's still a massive problem, and this has been too hard for Sol Campbell. At the same time, Sol Campbell has not helped himself either, which is a fair balance.
No, it's a really good piece. It's a really rounded piece in that respect, and it's well worth your time digging out.
Yeah. He quoted that the Dan Ashworth, Helen Grant, was sports minister. They had a discussion at Whitehall about the lack of black managers, which is a very worthwhile thing, obviously. And so Campbell asked Dan Ashworth about Gary Neville. He's been fast-tracked through the system, fair enough point. Then Ashworth spoke favourably about Neville's work with England and the setup, and then he was interrupted. Campbell said, "But I'm Sol Campbell." And Ashworth tried to continue, says Taylor, and again a hand went up. "But I'm Sol Campbell," louder this time, more indignant. You know, like he does see himself as one of the, as he says himself, one of the greatest football minds in the world. And if he is, then I hope it goes well for him. So we'll have to see how Campbell does at Macclesfield.
Yeah. The other piece that you mentioned there a minute ago, a complete contrast. The piece with David Snade and Jim Beglin in the Daily Mail, which I guess we were talking about. Whatever it's called, Derby Sunday, is that what it's called?
I don't know what it's called this stage.
Whatever it is, and like there is like Jim and David Snade has gotten a really nice piece with Jim Beglin. Jim Beglin's story may be quite well known in a lot of respects, but just when this starts, it's really, really brilliant intro by David with Jim's. It takes you to the 1986, the end of the 1985-1986 season, when Liverpool win the Premier League, or the old First Division title, and the tears flowed and Jim Beglin couldn't stop them. He didn't want to. This was his release, not of the grief or the pain or the anguish that had consumed him following his father's death, but of the joy and pride he felt achieving the ultimate success in English football. And the whole start of the piece is how, you know, Beglin was a Chelsea supporter. I think his two brothers were Everton supporters, or United supporters, but his dad was a Liverpool fan. And his dad had got the boat over with him when Beglin signed for Liverpool. And tragically then, a few months later, when Beglin was over doing pre-season with Liverpool, he got a phone call to say that his father had had a heart attack and died before he ever got a chance to say goodbye to him. Tom Beglin never saw Jim play for Liverpool. And I guess there's a few layers to it. There's a whole lot of layers. Of course, Jim suffered his horrific leg injury in a Merseyside derby. And I guess there's just so much in it when you think about. I've been listening to it a lot this week, and Graham Souness touched on it in the Sunday Times piece, which the headline is, "Do foreign players really care about the importance of a derby?" And kind of it's the kind of weekend that leads itself to speculate about kind of what the derby means to certain people. And I think just for Jim Beglin, like that season, that 1985-86 season, it was Liverpool and Everton locked neck and neck the whole way. It was such a huge achievement for Liverpool to come from as far off Everton as they were to ultimately win it. And the emotional release then that he felt, the personal significance of it for him when his father was a Liverpool fan and he had never been a Liverpool fan himself, it really seemed to mean more, I guess. And it's just it's just a lovely way of kind of teeing up the weekend, the weekend that's in it. Like,
yeah, it's a brilliant piece. David Snade does a lot of brilliant pieces, actually. It's just poignant the whole way through. Like, it is shocking the way Beglin's career was ended, you know. Paisley said of that leg break, "It was painful to look at, never mind experience. I've seen one or two broken legs over 50 years in the game, but not one made me really wince. Jim's did," is what Paisley said. Paisley's a tough man. You know, if he says he's wincing at that tackle. Have you seen that tackle recently?
Jeez, not for years.
No, not for a while, thankfully.
It's on YouTube, and it's just, it was a shocking tackle. It was a horrific moment. And that basically ended him, and he was only, 23, 24? Kind of trucked on as best he could, called it quits in 91 with Leeds at 27. So missed Euro 88, missed Italian 90, missed all that stuff. This was a guy who was, at 22, a key figure in a Liverpool title-winning side and was set for an absolutely stunning 10, 12 years ahead, you know, but for that tackle. So it is tough, and the stuff about his father is, I hadn't realised that at all, I must say. It's amazing. Stuff gets lost. I didn't realise he'd come from Shamrock Rovers, where Johnny Giles had moulded him when Giles and Dunphy went back, and he got the boat over with his father. It's well worth the piece. It's on page 89. You could easily miss this piece, I should tell you. It's I think it deserves 2 pages, an extra 500 words, and
a few good photos to draw you in.
It's great, yeah, because you could easily miss it. You look at Taylor's one, for instance, Daniel Taylor, the full page and the big byline, and it's amazing in the newspaper. We were just talking outside. You could so easily skip by some of the best stuff if it's not presented well.
It's really important. It's the beauty of the Sunday papers that some pages can really draw you in about a sport or something you would know nothing about. And we might get to an example in a second. Yeah. But to skip back, again, to talk about layout, that Dennis Walsh piece, there's so many good stats in there. I'm looking there as a stats head. I love a big graphic. Yeah. There's no big graphic to draw you in and say, this is what these stats mean. And that's a shame. But this Beglin piece is really nice. Yeah, the Sunday Times piece, just for anybody who hasn't seen it, to illustrate the piece, it's a big kind of 3/4 page spread, both sides of the fold, with a picture of Galway's Sean Armstrong. And there is a hand passing. Hand passing. The caption does contain a small stat, and there are some stats kind of in a sidebar. But as Andy's saying, like, especially when you're dealing with material that the general public might sometimes feel is a little bit kind of dry or inaccessible, there are ways in which you can present it, and I would agree with Andy. Like, I think that there was a way of illustrating that story that probably captured the essence of what was being talked about better than a relatively mundane picture. Like, there's nothing at all remarkable about that picture of Sean Armstrong. It's just a man hand passing a ball. It's very big. I know what that looks like. Yeah, it is very big, Joe. By the way, Stevens, who tackled Beglin, Gary Stevens, I hadn't realised this. He offered to visit Beglin in hospital after the tackle, and Kenny Dalglish was not keen on it, but Beglin decided to accept, and he said, "I don't want to be bitter about it. I really don't."
So that was a nice touch. Seems like a decent fella, Jim Beglin.
Yeah,
in many ways. We are reviewing the Sunday papers. We're coming to the end very shortly. Brought to you with Screwfix.ie, championing the trade with a choice of over 20,000 quality trade products. So, final story or two. There's Lancaster for Ireland talk on page 11 of the Sunday Times, or more so, it may not be. Lancaster for Ireland talk. So this is Peter O'Reilly.
Peter O'Reilly in the Sunday Times, page 11. There's a lot of stuff in the papers really all week, given that when the news came out about Joe Schmidt's future non-coaching arrangements. Andy Farrell's anointment as future coach, and then who would work alongside him. Obviously, people are looking at Lancaster, Stuart Lancaster. But this piece is doing something slightly different, which is saying you can have a lot of young people in that senior setup. So whether they bring in an O'Gara or you've already got someone like a Simon Easterby, you've got maybe lacking the senior citizen role. The person who's seen it all, done it all. And Peter O'Reilly says, well, hold on, let's get Wayne Smith in here. You know, get the former brains behind a lot of amazing teams, a real thinker about the game, which would definitely tally well, I think, with all we know about and all we've seen with the Irish coaching setup. It's a matter of how you get someone like that in. I mean, the guys in the RFU weren't stupid.
No.
I'm sure they have the name there, whether discussions have happened. It's just, at least it's something a little bit different. And of course, Leinster play Bath over the next couple of weeks. And there's no secret that they wouldn't mind someone like Lancaster in the role.
I mean, the unknown, I guess, in the and to even be starting a conversation with a man of Wayne Smith's caliber is really the position that we want to be in. Like, you know, you want to be talking of that level of expertise. You want to be talking about that level of experience in really bringing value to the coaching ticket. The unknown is, as far as I recall, when he was before Eddie Jones was appointed, Wayne Smith was in the running there as well, and kind of let it be known that he didn't really fancy the England job because he didn't really want to leave New Zealand at that moment in time. Whether or not that has changed, I mean, there's no denying his success especially as an assistant, like, you know, not so much as a number one, but as a number two with a couple of World Cups and with a Super Rugby title under his belt. I mean, there's absolutely no denying what he would bring.
It's true, because O'Reilly makes a great point, I think. So say Lancaster goes, say Wayne Smith says, no, I live where I live and I'm not coming up there and I'm happy where I am and all that stuff. So say Lancaster ultimately becomes the man.
Alongside Farrell.
Yeah. So he's running the attack, he's under Farrell. And then Peter O'Reilly says, imagine keeping Cullen but losing Lancaster at Leinster. Imagine trying to find someone who will run the team attack and the team defence and be happy to remain nominally, at least, as number two to Cullen. Like, Lancaster at Leinster is a very difficult person to replace, and the working relationship with Cullen is so ego-free and works so well. And so that makes me wonder, who's going to make this decision? So say you're David Nucifor, say you're Philip Brown, say you're the people discussing this. And we are now in an era where Joey Carberry will move from Leinster to Munster for the betterment of Irish rugby. Will they look at Irish rugby as a whole and look at Leinster, and will they say, Lancaster and Cullen is working so well, let's leave that in place and let's just find someone else who may not be quite as good as Lancaster to go in with Farrell? And then I think, well, 80% of the revenue comes from the international team, so it may be a case of tough luck Leinster again, and David Nucifor will say, we're really sorry, but if we need Lancaster, we're going to offer him the position, and that's that.
You don't really need us for that segment. You've just done the whole thing.
Is it the 80%?
That's it.
Of the income is international? It's all about the international team.
Like,
what Leinster have is just so working so beautifully. Well, they must be loath to try and mess with that.
The angle that you didn't manage to get right there is one that Peter mentions, is that what's Stuart Lancaster want? Like,
it doesn't matter what he wants. Do what he's told to do.
Like,
no, of course, that's crucial,
He seems perfectly happy being Leo Cullen's number two. The 2 points Peter O'Reilly makes. One, how would the dynamic work with him working under Farrell when Farrell worked under him at England? And two, like, maybe he just doesn't want big gigs anymore. Maybe Leinster is plenty big for him. Like, maybe he doesn't want to be a number one or number two in a national team. Maybe
the nice thing about taking a job, so since we're already in a world where Andy Farrell is the next Ireland rugby coach, right? So therefore, any discussion that someone like Lancaster would have would be, it's not going to be the number one gig, which means that all that pressure, it means that the Leo Cullen job has already been taken by Andy Farrell at that level. So he can go, right, I'm commuting from England anyway. I can commute less often for the Irish setup than I would have to for my daily grind at the Leinster setup. That must have an attraction, and there'll be a very different ask than to be a head coach with any English club, for example.
No, it's true. That said, his kids are approaching leave the nest territory within the next year or two. So potentially his wife could move over to Dublin with him if he was to stay at Leinster. I mean, of course, what he wants is going to have a big say in things. But I suppose if he's happy there and no one approaches him with the Irish job, then he may continue to be happy there. It's his intention will come into it if he's approached by David Nucifora. And so the question might be for the RFU, this guy's going to be very hard to replace at Leinster. Should we leave him there, or should we approach him for the betterment of the Irish rugby team as a whole?
The big one is making sure that Lancaster is locked into a coaching extension
Either
on
way.
the
One
island
way
of
or
Ireland,
one way or the
stop,
other,
and then you work from there, because that gives everyone a lot more certainty about the future plans.
Yeah. You found this, Andy. All credit to you.
Yeah.
So I would have missed this totally. This is in the Sunday Telegraph.
Goes back to maybe what we were saying earlier about layout and...
This guy is unbelievable. And the piece admits that you will not have heard of him, but it's actually worth hanging on here for the 2 or 3 minutes to hear about John Albon. So, bit of a philosopher come long-distance marathon madman. And he's going to potentially get $1 million at the weekend. Which British athlete has received the biggest paycheck for winning a race? By midday next Sunday, the answer could be someone most of us will almost certainly never have heard of. John Albon. Good intro.
Yeah, John Albon. John Albon is a sky runner, and I didn't know what
something
sky
that I'd
running
never
was.
heard of before 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
What is sky running?
Sky running is what he has to do coming up in Iceland is to run 100 miles, climbing over 7,000 metres and traversing more than 400 obstacles in freezing conditions and in less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
And because he's already won 2 of these, they're called Spartan Ultra events.
World Championships.
Yeah, he's won 2 of these in 2018, so if he does this third one, wins it, and completes that 100 mile in the 24 hours, he'll win this huge bonus. But that's only part of the thing, as you say. It's like, yes, this is a weird sport. I'd never heard of it.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant photo.
Yeah, it's a great photo.
Just of him up high, there's clouds underneath him, which kind of sets the scene. But
For a photographer that had to go up there with him.
yeah, but
It's 100 miles on flat track in moderate conditions. How doable is that?
Okay.
Before we get to the 100 miles over 7,000 metres.
Before we
the
get
side
to
of a
this,
mountain.
this is our back of an envelope quick Google search. It seems to be just under the 12-hour mark. You could, when I say you could, it has been done.
An elite athlete, an elite ultra runner on a flat track.
What do you mean,
Track
the
condition.
12-hour mark you could run?
12 hours, 100 miles in grand conditions
Yeah.
on a track.
That has been done.
Has been done.
Okay.
Okay. So then move that off the track with mountains and very high. I mean, this is just, it's crazy stuff.
It's at
amazing.
altitude, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, for it to qualify as sky running, it has to start above 2,000 metres above sea level. So you're not talking about, can you run up and down Croagh-Patrick a load of times? You're already talking about, starting from a distance where the altitude is probably prohibits most people from even trying to do any sort of strenuous activity, let alone try and run 100 miles in 24 hours.
The last fella who tried managed 71 miles before conking out. So I'd say they feel like their $1 million is safe here. There's a big difference between 71 miles and 100.
Well, it's only another marathon and a bit at the end.
It's not like this guy, the last guy did 98 miles and was so close.
Yeah, I'm sure the barrier would be pushed out a little bit further if people were knocking on the 98-mile door.
So that's the first half of it, right?
Yeah.
You got the sport we've never heard of, but then there's this guy who just seems to be this guy who accidentally found himself as
Incredible.
very good at sky running.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really train.
No.
Or he says he doesn't.
Well, he's no background in athletics, and
Yeah.
he did his first one of these kind of events at 20, but he was working in the London Underground as a building surveyor. And then at 20 started doing this. He started running ever since. And
Doesn't like doing boring stuff like,
No.
going to the gym. He likes to go running. I like to ski in the winter, and I like to go bouldering, which is good for gripping. I'll do a bit of anything, really. Quote, "It makes me healthy. You look at someone like Mo Farah, and does he actually look healthy? If the whole UK population tried to copy Mo Farah's lifestyle, they would have so many problems.
Yeah. I just eat food. Who knows if you're meant to have a bit of alcohol or not? Who knows if you're meant to have a protein shake? People just make it up. And most people are just trying to make it up to sell stuff, which is probably partially true. And so he's not too fussed about whether he gets the $1 million or not. Doesn't even have a TV, lives with his wife in Norway. A minimalist, I think, existence would be fair summation. He's just happy out.
Incredible.
Seems to be, yeah.
Incredible stuff. I guess there was a nice counterpoint maybe to this.
By the way, Niall, we Bagsy him for off the ball first. You 42, you 42 lads, keep your hands off. Technically, this was an off the ball find. We're getting this guy. I don't know how we'll get in touch with him, by the way. I doubt he has a mobile.
Yeah, well, maybe best to wait until after next weekend and see. I'll be keeping an eye on the Spartan race, though, to see how he gets on.
Yeah, best of luck to him.
Kind of a nice counterpoint maybe was David Walsh's piece with Molinari.
Golfer of the year.
Back page of the Sunday Times, Golfer of the Year. And kind of talks about, like, just when we're talking there about John Albom and how he has dispensed with the conventional wisdom on what you do or how you're supposed to attack your sport and how you're supposed to go through your routine. Like, this is essentially the essence of what has brought Molinari to Golfer of the Year status and has brought him to major success, in that David Walsh starts and says that, Molinari was always known as such a good ball striker, but it wasn't so much a compliment as a lament, is how David Walsh puts it.
He could have been a contender.
And the piece is fascinating in that, Molinari basically says, soon I started looking at ways that I might get better. The starting point was scrap everything we've done so far. Everything. Why is the gym the first thing I do on days when I'm playing a tournament? Why do I leave putting to the end? They were simple questions to which there were simple answers. It's what he always did and what most of the pros did. Not good enough, he thought. And it kind of goes into a really fascinating... I didn't know all of it. I obviously was aware that he had worked with Dave Allred for a time. Dave Allred, who's worked with the world's best place kickers in rugby, as well as with Luke Donald. Yeah. And Allred got him into this scenario where when they were practicing, they would try to make things as stressful as possible, so that when it comes to a scenario when you're playing the back nine of an open and the pressure is at its most intense that it has ever been and the conditions are all over the place, the stress of that is something that you've become so accustomed to.
Yeah, it's
but it really was very interesting how he just decided, well, I've been doing this because this is the by the book way of how to be a professional golfer.
Yeah.
It's obviously got me so far, but it's not getting me as far as I feel I'm capable of doing. Let's rip it all up. Let's do what works for me. Yeah. And I just thought, considering what John Albom was saying about, protein shakes and alcohol and all the rest, like stuff that, conventionally seemed like kind of accepted, and how he has found a success in that way. It's, Francesco Molinari has done likewise.
Yeah. I watched him and Allred actually at the Ryder Cup in Le Golf National, because I read all about this. He's talked a bit about Allred before and being outside your comfort zone at all times, and it was interesting, even when he's doing his putting routine, Allred standing over him with a pen and paper out, and they're clearly noting how he's doing, because he keeps a log over the year of targets he has to hit, and he has to start again if he doesn't get a certain number in a row and all this kind of stuff. But everything is, he's not just warming up with putts the way a McIlroy would do. Everything is logged, and he's trying to beat what he did the previous day and the previous day, and because he's wired a certain way, he wants to.
Was it evident kind of what kind of stress and stimuli and they were using, or is it all kind of scenario based?
Allred had a small air pistol that was firing him.
Yeah.
No, it's just fascinating, I feel like.
I even thought, geez, maybe on a Ryder Cup day where you're playing two matches, he'll be tired. He doesn't need you taking notes of his putting, just let him warm up. But they were going through he was getting X's and O's if he got it right or wrong, and he was going through it all, and it makes perfect sense.
But it makes perfect sense to players who are wired a certain way. You just nailed it. For another kind of player, that will be the
head wrecking.
They will need their coach to take care of that and maybe give them a one-liner, but they won't be able to process it. Molinari is the kind of guy who can process it.
Yeah, it seems that way. Gents, we're out of time. Thanks so much for popping in. Really enjoyed that. Niall Kelly, Deputy Editor of the 42.ie. Best of luck on Thursday.
Thank you very much.
Congrats on the fighter either way. Cheers. And broadcaster and journalist Andy Mcgeady, thank you for coming in. Appreciate it. That's the paper review, available for podcast as well. Good luck.